When it comes to TV shows and movies, my taste is very particular. Not refined, just limiting. Particular in a way that knocks a lot of whatever people insist I need to watch straight off the table. With very few exceptions, my number one rule is simple: nothing negative. No horror, no gore, no psychological thrillers, nothing that might leave me in a bad headspace. I watch TV and movies for fun, for laughs, or for inspiration. I don't want to sit on my couch to feel worse about myself or the world. I just want to enjoy myself. With those rules in mind, you can imagine that I don't venture very far from a rigid rotation of sitcoms, children's movies, period dramas, and my chronic Sex and the City and Gossip Girl rewatches. So it should come as no surprise that my favorite genre of them all is romance. Given my limited palette for entertainment, my close friends, coworkers, and fiancé have more or less given up on trying to get me to watch anything outside of my comfort zone, which is why I was surprised when my best friend called me before our Saturday night hangout, insisting that there was a new show we had to watch. It's this new show on HBO. Everyone on the internet is talking about it. It's a show about hockey, but it's really about this gay romance. It's supposed to be really sexy. I was skeptical. A hockey show? But if my best friend, who hasn't played a team sport since our 9th grade volleyball class, is recommending a show about hockey to me, who also hasn't ran a half mile since that same 9th grade class, then it must be worth a watch. For me, and I know for a lot of women, there is nothing quite like a good romance. When the chemistry between two characters hits just right, even if they aren't technically the endgame couple, you can feel it, like a little electric spark at the tip of your ears. A good romance might transport you back to moments in your own life where you had a crush, fell for someone new, or the early sparks of your relationship. Romance can offer comfort. In our difficult and often painful real lives, romance stories are loud and clear about their happily ever after intentions. We know that no matter the trials and tribulations, we can be certain that our lovers will end up back in each other's arms. They give us hope that in a world that often feels loveless, true love is still possible, and happiness is just around the corner from all of us. I love romance so much that I wrote my college thesis all about the genre. I have also been very critical of it in the past for its often entirely inaccurate depictions of love. Romance is known to place the value of a relationship on its level of passion, not on any long-term compatibility, communication, or shared values. One could argue that romance media is closer to pure fantasy, something like Star Wars, than stories that are grounded in reality. But honestly, as long as we keep the understanding of it being fiction in mind, that is okay with me. Romance is a genre created and consumed almost entirely by women. A 2014 study by the Romance Writers of America revealed that women make up 82% of romance book buyers in the United States. In more recent years, readership demographics have expanded significantly, primarily among LGBTQ audiences. From May 2022 to May 2023, the sale of LGBTQ romances grew by over 40%. This is a genre that deserves to exist exactly as is and continue to grow because it stands to showcase stories from often underrepresented voices. Where you get into my problem is that a lot of our modern mainstream romances aren't romantic at all. Beginning in the late 2000s and early 2010s, films like 500 Days of Summer and La La Land attempted to deconstruct romance tropes and subvert audience expectations. The industry largely turned its back on the traditional romantic comedy. Meet-cutes, grand gestures, and makeovers were traded in for realism, irony, and emotional restraint. At the time, audiences were tired of cookie-cutter formulas, and those changes felt necessary. I actually admire movies like 500 Days of Summer for showing how damaging it can be to try and live your life like a rom-com. But here we are in 2025, and people are craving romance again. Audiences want that cozy, hopeful feeling back. They are tired of being reminded of the harsh realities of relationships in the one genre that's supposed to offer an escape. As a whole, romance had swung so far into intensity and toxicity, like 50 Shades of Grey or 365 Days, or into a style of detached nihilism, like any episode of Girls, that many of these stories have fallen into my personal too mean-spirited to watch category. That's why, when the marketing for the Materialists promoted a return to the 90s rom-coms this summer, even I was excited. Unfortunately, it didn't live up to that promise. The Materialists was funny, glamorous, and a little ridiculous, but also strangely dark. The cultural landscape around relationships has turned into a breeding ground for nihilism. Romance media today can either be as hollow as a Hallmark movie or as depressing as a historical drama, but it can never be smart and joyful. It's like romance forgot how to flirt. So there we were on a Saturday night, my best friend and I curled up on my couch with a bottle of wine and a box of macaroons, ready to just try the hockey show, Heated Rivalry. In truth, my expectations were very low. I assumed it would be explicit, given the HBO platform, but with the general quality of a Netflix original starring Sophia Carson. I was wrong. I can't say we gave the first episode our full attention, aside from a few physically compelling scenes, but by the end of episode 2, I was locked in. We tore through all 4 available episodes at the time, and I couldn't help but feel disappointed as the final one came to a close. I wanted to see more. I was falling in love with an entirely new show, and I truly can't tell you the last time a fresh piece of romance media made me this excited. After my bestie went home, I did what any good essayist would do and did my research. I wanted to know everything there was to know about this show. I found out it's based on a book series by Reid, Game Changers. I figured that I might head to the Barnes & Noble down the street from my office on Monday to pick up a copy, only to learn on Reddit that the full series has sold out in all of North America. Clearly, this show was hitting a nerve for plenty of people besides me. I found a copyrighted audiobook on YouTube for Heated Rivalry and completed it by Sunday night. And a few days later, with my Audible subscription renewed, I finished its sequel, The Long Game. For me to read one book, let alone 2 books, in the span of 3 days is unheard of. I had to take a second to reflect. Why am I so into this? During their press tour for the series, leading actors Hudson Williams and Connor Story showed off their matching tattoos, reading "Sex Sells" on their legs. I had to ask myself the uncomfortable question: is the only reason I'm really into this show the beautiful actors and the X-rated scenes? Sex on TV isn't anything new, especially now thanks to streaming services that have their own rules about what can be shown. Shows like Sex and the City obviously have plenty of explicit moments, but most of those scenes are played for comedy or awkward realism. Something is always going wrong, or Kim Cattrall is moaning so loud that it's hard to believe it's supposed to be sexy. Meanwhile, movies that try to be straight up sexy, like 365 Days or shows like Sex Life, end up becoming memes online because the often subpar dialogue ruins the fantasy. Unlike its various predecessors, Heated Rivalry is being praised, not just for its inclusive approach to romance and its ability to turn viewers on, but for actually being really good television. It currently sits with a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 9.1 out of 10 on IMDb, with episode 5 now tied as the highest rated episode of TV of all time on IMDb, with a 10 out of 10 score. For comparison, the average girly pop Netflix original movie that my bestie and I put on, like My Oxford Year, floats around a 29%. This isn't to say that Heated Rivalry is a return to form for the rom-com genre. It very much isn't. For one, it's about a gay relationship, which is cool with me and a lot of straight female viewers. Good romance is good romance. But it goes without saying that a show like this wouldn't have existed back in the golden age of rom-coms from the late 90s and early 2000s. It is also very canonically about sex. The original book has a 5 out of 5 on the steaminess level of romance.io. Our 2 protagonists are young men in their teens to early 20s. they are figuring out themselves and their sexuality. They don't really know anything about love, and they don't really have time to sort it out at the beginning of their relationship, so they just jump into their physical connection, with very little communication otherwise. Heated Rivalry uses sex as a way of communication for Shane and Elia's relationship. We see their connection grow, strengthen, or suffer based on how they interact in the bedroom. Shane is shy and nervous in his day-to-day life, but allows himself to show his eagerness to make Elia happy behind closed doors. Elia, though rough around the edges and harsh with his words, is a very attentive and kind lover. Without the sex scenes, you don't really get a full understanding of their relationship dynamic. And this is a facet of real life that is rarely shown on screen, despite compatibility and communication during intimacy being a very important part of any romantic relationship. I think what Heated Rivalry really nails perfectly is its tone. Director and showrunner Jacob Tierney explained on the What's Chaos podcast that he wanted the show to be joyful. Not sanitized, not apolitical, but joyful in the sense that simply watching two queer people love each other on screen is political enough. He wanted to tell a story about hopefulness and about unapologetic gay and queer joy. The road we are headed down is promised to be one of happiness. The creators have been upfront that the show will be following the book's happy ending. The tone of Heated Rivalry is fast-paced. Maybe at times in the first episodes too fast, but it feels like we aren't wasting time on side plots or scene setting. We are dropped straight into the world of Shane Hollander and Elia Rosenoff, and the show trusts us to keep up. It's spicy, it's urgent, and it's focused. This story knows exactly who it's about and refuses to dilute that emotional core. Unfortunately, the current status of love for many young people feels bleak, and it is really no surprise, when so much of contemporary dating is done through deeply unromantic systems of dating apps, texting receipts, and checking who saw your Instagram story. One of my biggest pet peeves in modern rom-coms is their obsession with texting. Entire plot points unfold via on-screen messages, and it constantly pulls me out of the story. I don't want to watch a visual art form to read. And it often feels lazy, like technology is just being shoved into the narrative just to prove that the movie exists in the present day. Heated Rivalry is the rare exception. Texting in this show actually matters to the plot. Shane and Elia are hiding their relationship, so Elia creates undercover contacts, Jane and Lily, so they can still text without anyone suspecting they are anything other than straight. Messaging feels like an integral part of their narrative, because it is one of the only ways they can communicate over long distances and time spans without being found out. In fact, it's a text that fully hooked me on this show. Episode 1 was fun, and I was feeling the same level of mild intrigue for most of episode 2 until the last scene. After months of emotional distance following the Russian Olympics, Elia wins MVP at the NHL Awards. Shane goes back to his hotel room to congratulate him, and Elia tells him to pleasure himself in front of him as a reward. The explicit scene is a wow, but my real attachment to the show began afterwards. Shane tries to connect emotionally with Elia, but Elia brushes him off. Shane leaves for the night feeling defeated, and in the elevator he begins typing, "We didn't even kiss," but deletes it. This unsent text appearing and slowly being deleted away from the screen was the first time my heart cracked open for these characters. Because we all know that feeling, when we realize a relationship is unbalanced, wanting more than the other person is willing or able to give, and stopping yourself from asking for it. That's good romantic tension. A romance lives or dies on chemistry. If I don't believe these characters are in love, if I don't feel it, then the entire thing collapses. Chemistry is so fundamental that it can override original narrative plans. A perfect example comes from Friends. The creators initially planned for Monica and Joey to be the central couple, but the chemistry between David Schwimmer and Jennifer Aniston during casting was so undeniable that Ross and Rachel became the emotional core of the show instead. That kind of chemistry can't be manufactured. One issue I see constantly in modern rom-coms is the dialogue trying to compensate for a lack of chemistry. Everyone is so overly quippy, self-aware, and intellectual, it feels scripted. The chemistry in Heated Rivalry is undeniable. It speaks to the audience. And the dialogue is intentionally sparse, and that restraint is actually deeply effective. Shane is shy, and according to author Rachel Reid, autistic. Ilya has spent his life suppressing emotions and navigating a language barrier outside of Russian. The few times they do speak, we listen. Sometimes it's awkward but flirty, like Scott and Kip talking about serial killers in the smoothie shop. Or sometimes it's devastating and raw, like Ilya's Russian monologue. However, most of the chemistry is communicated purely through body language. I don't know much of anything about acting, but it amazes me how perfectly Hudson and Connor are able to move themselves in order to express their characters' emotions and show their chemistry. From barely there smirks to slight eye movements to Ilya's dominating physicality and Shane's quiet restraint, it keeps you glued to the TV. Their bodies are doing the emotional labor that dialogue often fails to do in modern romance. I think it is important to say this plainly. Realism does not require cynical negativity. Shows like Parks and Recreation or The Good Place portray relationships that feel grounded, thoughtful, and emotionally healthy without being cynical. Somewhere along the way, we as a society have decided that the only way to show the real world is to show us on our worst days. And I have never understood the concept that real life is inherently tragic. I see this constantly online. There's an entire genre of TikToks showing people's 5 to 9 after their 9 to 5. Commuting home, reheating leftovers, working out at the local gym, and going to bed early. Half of the comments praise the creators for their honesty. The other half insists that the person's life must be depressing, as if joy can't exist in the routine, as if quiet happiness doesn't count. Heated Rivalry isn't realistic in the same way. It is still 100% a glossy, heightened romance, but it has the heart of something real. At its core, it's a show about love, but also about loneliness and isolation. Two experiences that are especially common for closeted people and for those living hyper-visual, travel-heavy lives. I love that the show allows silence. It doesn't spoon-feed us every emotional beat. We are trusted to read between the lines, and that restraint actually makes it feel more real, because so much romantic tension is built on missed communications. Like, he hasn't texted me back, or I wasn't sure what she meant when she said she liked me. As a culture, we struggle to decipher love. Heated Rivalry understands that, and the show treats that confusion with tenderness. Heated Rivalry works, not because it reinvents romance, but because it remembers what romance is for. It isn't ashamed of desire. It isn't afraid of softness. It doesn't treat love as a punchline or a cautionary tale. In a media landscape that often mistakes cynicism for intelligence, Heated Rivalry dares to be earnest, and in many ways, that's its most radical quality. Romance doesn't need to be tragic to be real. It doesn't need to be ironic to be smart, and it certainly doesn't need to punish its characters to be meaningful. What Heated Rivalry proves is that joy, chemistry, and emotional sincerity still resonate, maybe now more than ever. In a time when so much feels heavy, watching two people fall in love without apology feels almost rebellious. And if this show is any indication, romance hasn't died, it's just been waiting for permission to flirt again.